The shove came so suddenly that the stainless steel tray slipped from her hands, clattering against the mess hall floor in a burst of scattered utensils. Conversations froze mid-sentence, forks hovered halfway to mouths. Every Marine within sight turned, first toward the fallen tray, then toward the girl standing over it, shoulders squared, jaw tight, eyes steady in a way that didn't match the humiliation she had just been handed. The Marine who had shoved her barely paused. He muttered something under his breath, something coarse, something meant to diminish her, and kept walking as though an inconvenience had stepped into his path, nothing more. Yet the air inside the hall grew unnervingly still, the kind of silence that exposes character more brutally than confrontation ever could. Some Marines looked away to protect their own conscience. Others stared, waiting to see if she would crack under the weight of public disrespect. But she didn't bend. She simply breathed deeply, deliberately, as though gathering not courage but patience. Her uniform sleeves carried a faint warmth from the sun outside, her boots still dusted with red sand from a morning inspection on the training grounds. She stooped to collect the utensils with a slow, almost graceful precision, not because she accepted humiliation, but because she refused to lash out like someone who had something to prove. She never had. She outranked almost everyone watching, though none of them realized it, yet not even the man who had shoved her. And in the back of the hall, where sunlight fell across rows of silent observers, a few younger Marines exchanged uneasy looks, sensing something dangerous and unspoken pulsing beneath her calm. Her name was kept quiet on base, not because she was unimportant, but because her reputation worked best when it wasn't announced. She was the woman commanders called when chaos demanded order, when diplomacy needed a steady hand, or when a mission needed someone both fearless and composed. Her rank didn't sit on her tongue. It sat in the way she carried herself, in that unflinching stillness now filling the mess hall, drawing attention like gravity. When she rose with the tray cradled against her chest, the Marine who had shoved her finally felt the shift. He turned, annoyance flashing across his face, expecting apology, deference, anything that reaffirmed his imagined superiority. Instead, he was met with eyes that held neither anger nor fear, only truth. It unsettled him more than confrontation ever could. Long before that moment, the base had whispered stories about a visiting officer whose arrival was meant to shape the chaos of the upcoming joint exercises. No one had expected her to be so young, so quietly precise, or so uninterested in being recognized. She had watched the morning drills in silence, offering no critique, no gesture that revealed authority. It was a test, one that many failed without realizing it. The Marine who shoved her had been one of them, a man whose confidence grew loudest in crowds, whose respect fell only where rank was obvious, and whose temper had become a predictable spectacle. She had observed him during the drills, noting the way he barked orders that didn't belong to him, how he dismissed the concerns of a junior corporal, how he mocked a nervous private after a misstep. During formation, none of these actions violated regulations outright, yet each one revealed an erosion of discipline, a rot that spreads quietly until someone with clarity stops it. Now, with the mess hall waiting for her reaction, she recognized the moment for what it was, a crossroad, one that could either expose the truth of leadership or let disrespect metastasize. The Marine crossed his arms, leaning back with an arrogance that masked the uncertainty growing beneath him. A few Marines at nearby tables watched him the way people watch a fire they're unsure will spread. The others focused on her, waiting for an outburst that never came. Instead, she approached slowly, each step measured, her expression calm enough to unsettle even the bravest. She placed the tray on a table beside her, the faint scent of reheated rations still lingering around it, and then looked at him with a patience he neither earned nor understood. Her voice, when she finally spoke, was steady enough to silence even the air between them. It wasn't anger. It wasn't wounded pride. It was clarity, sharp enough to cut through the layers of posturing that held him together. He straightened, suddenly aware that her presence didn't match her assumed rank. The quiet carried weight, the stillness felt intentional, and the eyes watching them from every direction were no longer judging her. They were judging him. A faint tremor of realization passed through him, though he fought it with a defensive smirk. She saw it all. She always did. She had been trained to read conflict long before violence erupted, to understand people before they understood themselves. And now she was watching the man unravel beneath the very silence he had forced upon the room. Her story stretched far beyond this hall. Years of operations across unstable borders had carved a discipline into her that no insult could pierce. She had negotiated ceasefires under fire, pulled wounded allies from collapsed compounds, and stood between armed men whose anger had turned hallways into battlegrounds. In all those moments, she learned that the worst danger never came from weapons. It came from unchecked ego. The Marine in front of her embodied every lesson she had survived. She knew men like him, men who mistook authority for dominance, men who believed respect could be extracted through volume instead of earned through character. She had seen such men crumble when confronted by someone whose strength was quiet, deliberate, and immovable. And now, as she watched his bravado tremble just slightly, she recognized the moment he realized his mistake. But she didn't humiliate him. She didn't raise her voice or weaponize her rank. Instead, she stepped closer until he had to tilt his chin upward to meet her eyes. She asked him one question, simple, calm, unimpressed. The words threaded through the silence like a whisper carried miles in still air. The Marine froze. The room held its breath, because that question was not about the shove. It was about the truth of who he had chosen to become. He swallowed hard, suddenly aware of every witness behind him. The base's reputation for toughness meant little in this moment. What mattered was the weight of his own character pressing down on him. And beneath her steady gaze, he felt it fully. She watched him with a kind of compassion that did not excuse him, but did invite him to rise above himself. He wasn't ready to answer. He wasn't ready to be better, but he was no longer able to pretend he had done nothing wrong. For the first time, he looked around not at the crowd, but at the consequences, at the junior Marines who had once admired him, at the private he had humiliated that morning, and at her, this quiet, unshakable officer he had shoved without knowing she could dismantle his entire career with a single sentence. Yet she didn't speak a rank. She didn't punish him. She simply stepped back and let the void of his silence become the mirror he needed to confront. Word traveled through the base in waves. By evening, the truth had unraveled. She wasn't just an officer. She was the high, ranking Marine currently present, assigned to evaluate the entire unit for an upcoming deployment cycle. The moment the news spread, the mess hall incident transformed from gossip into reckoning. Those who had watched quietly now saw the full weight of what they had witnessed. The Marine who shoved her felt the news like a physical blow. He sought her out, each step heavier than the last, burdened by a guilt that had grown from the silence she'd offered him. When he found her outside, standing near the flagpole as dusk painted the base in fading gold, he didn't speak at first. She didn't turn. She gave him space to call upon whatever dignity he still possessed. When he finally apologized, his voice carried none of the swagger he usually wore. It was raw, unguarded, the voice of a man confronting his own flawed reflection. She listened, not to excuse him, but to acknowledge that he finally understood the lesson she had not needed to teach aloud. Her reply was measured, steady, and unexpectedly gentle. She told him that rank means nothing without character, that respect is built in silence, not demanded in crowds, that leadership is measured not by how one handles power, but how one handles humility. And in that moment, the Marine who once towered over others felt himself stand straighter. not in superiority, but in accountability. She walked away afterward, not in dismissal, but in closure. The base watched her differently from that day forward, not because of her rank, but because of the quiet strength she carried into every room. The incident in the mess hall became a story retold across barracks, not as humiliation for the man who shoved her, but as a reminder that true authority never needs to raise its voice. And though she never spoke of it again, the Marine who once acted without thinking changed more than anyone expected. He trained harder, led quieter, listened deeper, because sometimes the most powerful lesson comes from the person who refuses to shout, and instead lets their integrity speak for them.